This month's Changemaker is Equal Justice Initiative founder and executive director Bryan Stevenson. He's worked for decades giving a voice to the voiceless in many different ways, and the world, it's taking notice. Tonight we find out what inspires him to continue working to change the world for the better. Usually when we hear lawyers say they'll fight for you, they're referring to personal injury. But when public interest attorney Bryan Stevenson says he'll fight for you, it's about protecting a client's basic human rights.
That the kids who end up with these sentences are the poor kids.
For more than 30 years, he and his organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, based in Montgomery, have helped those who've been dealt a bad hand by this country's criminal justice system.
There was no indigent defense system here. Poor people couldn't get the legal help they needed, and I really just wanted to respond to that and hoped I could make a difference, hoped I could help people, hoped we could shine a light on some of these really egregious injustices that I started seeing by looking at these cases.
EJI has made a difference, working to get innocent death row inmates exonerated, challenging excessive punishment for adults and children, and winning protections for the mentally ill. Stevenson has argued and won several cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, and EJI's reversal and release cases number into the hundreds.
That's all progress. Now, we still have a lot of challenges. There's a lot of work to be done. But I do think people are beginning to recognize that we cannot continue throwing people away, locking people up and throwing away the key, and giving up on people when there's still an urgent need for rehabilitation and restoration and redemption.
One of Stevenson's most famous cases is the subject of his book and the movie adaptation, Just Mercy. It's the story of Walter McMillan, a black man wrongfully sentenced to death for the 1986 murder of a white woman in Monroeville, Alabama.
You don't know what you're into down here in Alabama?
Thanks to Stevenson and the EJI, the case was overturned in 1993 and McMillan was released from prison.
About 10 years ago, I realized that if we don't start talking more broadly about what's happening in our system, about what's going on with regard to mass incarceration, we're not going to achieve the kind of change that I want to see. And that's when we started talking more publicly.
And not just talking, but taking bold steps to get others talking about the challenges facing the criminal justice system and about America's past. His organization established the EJI Museum on the site of a former slave warehouse. It documents the country's history of racial inequality. The EJI erected the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in 2018 in memory of the 4,400 black people lynched in this country between 1877 and 1950. And it recently opened the new Legacy Pavilion in January in memory of the 2,000 people lynched in America just after the Civil War between 1865 and 1876. Stevenson says the positive response he and the EJIs received for the organization's efforts has been encouraging.
We're still compromised and a little contaminated by this long history of racial injustice, and I want to keep pushing us to acknowledge that history, to be more courageous about recognizing that we have to do some things to repair the damage that all of this bigotry and bias and racism has created. Yeah, it has been really affirming to see people get past that fear and begin to recognize that, like they have in South Africa, like they have in Rwanda, like they have in Germany, we should have the courage to tell the truth about our history so that we can have a healthier future.
Stevenson says people's reaction to the monument show there's a hunger to try and get to a better place, and he's willing to strive for that better place starting first in Montgomery.
I think about the people who were in this community 60 years ago who had to frequently say, "My head is bloody but not bowed." I'm standing on the shoulders of people who did so much more with so much less. People in this community would put on their Sunday best and go places to protest for civil rights, knowing they would get beaten and battered and bloodied and bruised, and yet they went anyway.
So what's next for Bryan Stevenson and the EJI? Well, he says the organization is going to continue to look at projects that confront our past and help us imagine a brighter future. The EJI's work has also benefited the capital city. Ever since the Memorial for Peace and Justice opened, tourism in the capital city has been on the rise, and the increased foot traffic, well, that's translated into higher earnings for some businesses in the downtown area.